My name's Tom. I'm from our digital architecture team. Emily is joining us today from Jamf, and today we're going to be taking you through the next instalment of our Jamf School training series, which is restrictions and profiles, the impact of age ratings, best practice restrictions, reviewing restrictions with feature releases and templates. Bit of a mouthful, that one, but I'll hand it over to you, Emily, for a quick intro and we'll get started.
Yep, no problems. Good to see everyone again today. My name is Emily Clark and I am the Customer Success Manager for DFE South Australia within Jamf. And here, as Tom has said, we are here to present and talk to you about profiles in Jamf School, how they work, best practices for you using them, and what we can do when new keys and settings come out to ensure that we're keeping up to date with our new operating system releases. Can everyone see my screen? Excellent. So as I did just touch on there quickly, so we are going to take a quick look at what profiles are, but I'm sure most of you already know this. Some of the best practices for building profiles, templated profiles that have been created for you at the top level by Tom and how to use them. What happens when a new key or payload is added when Apple make new releases. And finally, some ways to troubleshoot and see what is happening with profiles. So what are profiles? Profiles, or configuration profiles that they are also called, automate the configuration of settings, accounts, restrictions and credentials across our fleet. They provide a way to ensure that we have consistent settings across all of our devices. At the basic part of them, they are an XML file. They contain a payload name and payload keys and options. They often have the file extension of .mobile config or a plist file, as they might be known on macOS as well. As I mentioned, profiles are made up of payloads. To create a new profile in Jamf School, you navigate to Profiles and click Create New. You will then select the type of payload profile that you wish to deploy. Is it for macOS or iOS? Payloads are the coloured options down the side of the profile window in Jamf School. As you can see here in this example, we are looking at the restrictions payload. The tick boxes in the main area of the screen are our keys or settings, and we can turn these off or on, and this will set them to true or false within the configuration. At a basic level, a configuration profile looks like this. XML text file. If you were to open one up, you can actually view this text and review what has been set in your profiles. So we do have our payload with its description at the top, and you can see a list of our keys below with their true or false options. So there are a number of ways to create profiles. The files themselves can be created by an MDM solution, such as Jamf School, or through a third-party tool, such as iMazing Profile Editor. Or maybe you might have seen them used in Apple Configurator too. Or if you really want to get adventurous, you can create them by hand. Now let's take a step back and understand why we might use a third-party tool like iMazing when Jamf School already includes how to create a profile inside it with a nice UI. iMazing can provide us with some additional settings that might not be included in Jamf School. For example, third-party applications such as Microsoft Office or Google Chrome, we may not have built that into the Jamf School UI, but these configuration profiles can still be set and created outside using a tool like iMazing. Another reason that you might want to use a tool such as iMazing is if you want to break out a specific key. Now, if we think back to that restrictions payload that we were looking at before, and we will see many examples of that payload through this talk, this contains many settings, with many of them turned on or off by default. In the Jamf School UI, it can be a little bit difficult to isolate one key. So if you were wanting to create a profile with just one key in it, you would actually have to go through and untick all of the boxes on that restrictions payload screen, and then just select or deselect the setting that you wanted to isolate. iMazing makes this a lot easier. You can simply select the payload that you want and the one individual key that you wish to set. There may be times when you want to set a specific setting to be controlled individually, and this might be where you would create an isolated or a single key payload. Some examples might be that you might want to, in your main restrictions payload, for most of the time you want to keep the iCloud settings locked. But perhaps then you want a subset of your devices to, or you're doing some testing and you want to turn that setting to on. You can disable the restrictions payload on your device and do some testing with just setting that individual key to see how it behaves. So these might be times where you might create a profile with iMazing, and there are some examples of that inside in the Jamf School tenant for DFE South Australia. Profiles that have been created outside of Jamf School can still be deployed with Jamf School. So if we have created a profile with iMazing or manually, we can import that profile into Jamf School. The reason that I bring this up, and it's a consideration, is that when we do import a profile into Jamf School from an external source, it could also be from another MDM. If you can export from your MDM, you could also import that into Jamf School. The caveat there is that when you do import it into Jamf School, it's not editable via the Jamf School UI. So if you did need to make any changes to your configuration profile, you would actually need to download that profile, make your changes with your editing tool of choice, and then use the replace profile to replace it with the new settings that you've applied. So that's just something to consider when we're creating profiles outside of Jamf School. So you can distribute profiles via many means, such as installing directly onto a device. However, today we're going to focus on delivering them via Jamf School. So let's take a look at some best practices for our profiles. When we're building a profile, some of the best practices to consider are taking a look at this example here. We can see that we have a group of payloads all in the one profile. So we've got that one configuration profile, and we've added the Wi-Fi, the web clips, restrictions, the wallpaper, and the passcode. You might call this a monolithic profile, and you might think that doing this would be a good idea. We could create one profile for students and one for staff, for example, pop all the settings into the one profile and hit deploy. Nice and easy to apply all of our required settings, but I want to share with you some examples of why this is not the best practice. Here I have my monolithic profile with all my settings applied, and a teacher has asked me to add a new web clip to the student's device. So I open up my profile in Jamf School and I add my new web clip to the web clip payload. I've not made any changes to the other payloads. They've all remained the same. I click Save and Jamf School sends the updates to the devices in scope. You might think that only the changes that I've made would be sent down to the device. But what actually happens when I update the configuration profile is the old profile from the device is removed. Yes, so that's right. We've removed from the device and then the new version is sent down. What do you think might have happened when this profile was removed? This profile contains our Wi-Fi details. Now, while there might only be a second or two between the profile being removed and the new one being applied, the Wi-Fi most likely will have dropped off. Guess what happens next? It's time for you to put your sneakers on and do some sneaker admin to manually reconnect all of your devices back to the Wi-Fi. You'll only do it once in your life, but you probably will do it. So for this reason, we would always recommend keeping each profile to one payload. Another example might be that if you have a monolithic profile for each grade, and each one has a Wi-Fi payload in it, if there was to be a change to this Wi-Fi payload, you need to edit each profile for each grade. By separating out your profiles to individual payloads, you can build up a configuration based on shared profiles, such as your Wi-Fi, that in most cases is the same for all of our students and all of our teachers. So in this scenario, you will only need to make this change once. So there would be many payloads that could be shared across our cohorts. Perhaps we have all students and we can have all of our restrictions. So we have an individual restrictions payload for all of our students. Keeping those separate means that we only need to edit them once and not multiple times if they were in a gear level, for example, payload with multiple payloads in the profile. So now, having said all that, there are times when you need to have multiple payloads in the one profile. In this example, we have our orange configuration profile created with the web filter, web clips, and restrictions. This might be done because we have some specific content filtering settings that we need to apply with our web clips, and perhaps we might want to set some specific restrictions around the use of the content in these web clips. In this scenario, we'll assume that there are dependencies between these three payloads. It makes sense to ensure that all the settings are applied at the same time. If we were to split these three into separate profiles, there could be a case of a device not receiving all three profiles and therefore affecting the end user experience. Another example of this is actually our Wi-Fi profile. In Jamf School, when you create a profile for the Wi-Fi, you will actually see that there is a specific profile type called Network Configuration Profile. By selecting this, when you are creating a profile, you will see that Jamf School automatically adds 4 payloads to the profile. That is because these payloads are dependent on each other, and we want to ensure that all the settings are applied at the same time. The biggest example with our Wi-Fi payload would be that we most often in our school environments require certificates to be able to connect to our Wi-Fi. We want to ensure that those certificates are delivered at the same time as our Wi-Fi details, with our SSID and all of those other details, our security levels and our security levels, and potentially our username and passwords, depending on the type of network that we're connecting to, that are required to connect to that network. We want to ensure that those certificates also appear on the device at the same time to allow that connection to happen immediately as soon as the network profile has been delivered. So the network profile is a classic example of where you have dependencies that you do need to deliver them at the same time. But we want them to be closely related so that we're ensuring that if we do need to make an edit, it's going to be only affecting that, that feature. So we also want to, another reason to consider keeping our payloads as individual payloads, or our profiles as individual payloads, is for troubleshooting. If we were doing some troubleshooting and we had a monolithic profile and we just wanted to test an example of we wanted to make a change and we weren't sure which of the payloads were affecting our troubleshoot, the problem that we're having, we would need to be deploying down all of those settings and removing those settings each time. So we want to be able to separate out those settings so that we can just pull off one profile at a time. Oh, we've fixed the problem because we were able to remove the XYZ profile and found that that was causing the problem. The next thing I wanted to take a look at is profile layering. In Jamf School, we have the concept of top level and school level. What this means at the top is that at the top organisation level, profiles can be created that apply to all devices enrolled in all schools within the Jamf School tenant. Or they can be shared to the school level to apply the scope at the school level. Now, Tom is going to dig into what's been created at the top level for you in a couple more slides. But the reason that I wanted to raise it here is to highlight what profile layering might look like and the considerations. So let's take a look at our old friend, the restrictions payload. As an example, at the top level, you might create a base level of restrictions that should be applied to all schools. These restrictions might cover off the basics around disabling Apple IDs, USB restrictions, blocking iMessage, etc. This profile is scoped to all devices in the Jamf School tenant. As this restriction profile has been created and deployed at the top level, at a school level, you won't be able to edit it. But at the school level, you've got some specific use cases where you need to apply some additional restrictions. Perhaps a set of iPads that are to be used for exams and you want to disable Apple Intelligence and the spell check. At a school level, you can create your own profile with the restrictions payload. Apply your school level settings and deploy this to your own set of devices. But what happens when a device has two restrictions payloads, profiles deployed to it? Both sets of settings will apply. But then what happens if both profiles have the same setting applied, but differently? For example, in my top level profile, I am blocking iMessage. But at the school level profile, I've allowed iMessage. In this case, Apple will take the most restrictive setting and apply this. So in this case, iMessage would be blocked. Profile layering can be done at a top level and a school level, but it can also be done within your school level just by creating multiple profiles with the same payloads applied. Just keep in mind that if you do have a conflicting setting and it's not applying, that you may already have it set in another restrictions payload, and that is taking preference because it's a higher security level restriction. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so I'm going to talk through how we've constructed some of the top level config in Jamf School and how you can leverage this at your school level locations. So for anyone who's spent some time in the profiles overview section of Jamf School, you've likely seen a number of these template profiles, which you can see in the screenshot on the right there. So we've got a bunch of these which are intended to be used as a baseline configuration. Okay, so they can be duplicated at your school level location and then modified as required. It's not visible in the screenshot, but there's descriptions adjacent to every profile, which give an indication as to how they can be used. So if you're unsure, please refer to that for guidance. And there's a platform column as well, which indicates which device platform it's for. So because there's different configs, different payloads, different keys contained within each of those, and it's important that obviously we scope the right profile types to the right hardware types. So once you duplicate these profiles at your school level location, they can be modified. If you go to edit any of the top level templates, which at the school level location, you'll see an orange shared profile badge next to them. They're going to be read only, so you're not able to edit those. You can view them, but you won't be able to edit them. So the recommendation is to duplicate them. And you may not need all of them. Worth pointing out as well that we've got a bunch that are school templates. I think there's about 16 or 17 from memory. Then there's a bunch that titled corporate template as well, and they're intended for our corporate users within DFE. A lot of them are double ups, but school template, and you can use the search box over on the right hand side of the profiles overview screen to actually filter by the profiles that have school template in the name. So moving on, so separate to the template profiles, there's top level profiles, and these profiles are intended to be scoped from the top level. In most instances, they can be scoped from the location level, but the intent is to scope these from the top level, and that's just to allow for ease of deployment, so that you don't have to necessarily replicate the config. An example there is with Ed Wi-Fi. So everyone on the call here probably has an awareness that Ed Wi-Fi, the central solution that is being rolled out to schools, is a little bit more complex to configure in terms of its payloads and its keys. So that's actually scoped in that at the top level by the Ed Wi-Fi project team. So going forward, schools won't need to worry about replicating this and then scoping it. It's all done centrally. So this is where this particular functionality can save school techs time for not having to worry about doing that. There are some, however, that can be deployed or scoped at the school level location. So the Cortex config profile is an example. So there's a couple of Cortex XDR, which is an endpoint security application that DFE utilizes, which can be scoped at the school level. Can be scoped at the top level as well, but yeah. I suppose the point there is that not every single profile DFE manages at the top level. So if, for instance, take the example of Cortex, you require that to be deployed to your devices, you do have the ability at the school level location to manage that independently. Once again, descriptions provide a description for what the profile is for. And yeah, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, profiles at the top level that are created at the top level are read-only at the school level. Moving on, Emily. So when it comes to the actual process of duplicating profile templates, so over on the right-hand side of each profile, you'll have these 4 icons. That third one there that's highlighted, that's the duplicate button. All right, so you click that, it will create a copy with the word copy in brackets added as a suffix at the end of the description. Now, in terms of naming your profiles, we haven't really provided any guidance or strong guidance on kind of how you should go about doing this. There are some recommendations, though. Prefixing your site code to the start of each profile description is good practice. What this will allow you to standardize, the naming convention of your profiles, but also help keep separation between them and the top level and template profiles. The top level and template profiles, we've actually put the way we've named them, we've actually put an emoji at the front of them, and through a bit of trial and error, we worked out that would put them at the bottom of the list in terms of, like, if you sort it alphabetically. So that way, if you put your site code prefixed, you can ensure that if you go to sort by name, then all of your school level profiles will appear together. And I think, yeah, that is all on this screen, Emily. I think it's back to you.
Yep, I just wanted to add on the naming side of things. One of the things that can make it a little tricky within Jamf School is that we don't have categories. So giving the naming conventions become really important. So making sure that your naming convention displays what the purpose is, and perhaps even in the description what the scope is. So that you don't have to click through and see what it's scoped to. So if you're creating a profile, for example, for year 3, popping that in the name will help you to quickly view and categorize yourself where profiles might be sitting and where they're being applied. So yeah, because there is no categories, using your naming convention can really help with the organization within that profiles list that can become quite long, and particularly with your templates as well that are visible, it can become a tricky thing to read through all of those names. So using a good naming conventions helps with your view and being able to see what's being applied to what year levels, for example. So there are a few payloads that I wanted to just touch on quickly with some special considerations around. So within our restrictions payload, we do have a USB restrictions. Now what this restriction applies to is being able to connect an iPad, for example, to a computer with Apple Configurator on it, or to a computer to share the network. If this setting is turned off, which is actually unticked, then you will not be able to connect your iPad to a computer, which can be tricky when you are working with troubleshooting, particularly for devices that perhaps are stuck in guided access mode and they've lost their Wi-Fi connection. We can't get them out of that guided access mode if we don't have a network connection. And the person who's put them into guided access mode has forgotten their passcode that they set for it. We need a way to troubleshoot and connect or get a network connection to those devices. Now, Tom, I'm not sure what this is set to in your default profile.
Take a quick look, Emily. I believe it should be turned off, however.
Yep. Yeah, so if it is turned off, we just need to consider that we set this setting before we deploy, or before we need to troubleshoot and connect it to the Ethernet, because if we can't get an Ethernet connection, we can't change that setting onto our iPads anyway. So that's just one of those ones just to consider how that's set and what you need, whether you need that for troubleshooting. Now the next one,
I misspoke there. It should be allowed. I'm just checking.
It's allowed. Yep. So that's good. So you shouldn't have to consider that, but do check that one if you're having problems with connecting any of your iPads to a computer and they're not able to pick up that network connection, or they're not connecting to Apple Configurator for any reason. The next one that I wanted to have a look at was the media content restrictions. Now this also lives in the restrictions payload. So the first tab that we see there in the screenshot is our restrictions that we were just looking at. And the next one over is media content. The important part of this one is around the apps. Now, you might think that it's a logical setting in a primary school or even in a high school that we want to set our app restriction to the age of 12, for example. Which would mean that applications that fit this age range are allowed on the device if they are rated above. So this rating comes from the App Store as well. So if they're rated above, they aren't able to use that app on the device. Now, what this can create is that some of our commonly used apps, like Google Chrome, are actually age rated of 18. If you set the restriction to 12, the apps that are rated at 18 actually won't appear on the screen of the iPad. So if you're deploying out some apps and you've got this restriction set, and the apps are not appearing on the home screen, but it looks like they've been deployed down through Jamf School, come and have a check of this setting, check the age rating of the app in the App Store and see whether this setting might be conflicting with your apps that you're trying to deploy. The next one that I wanted to have a quick touch on is the passcode. By default, a passcode payload will set it to apply immediately. Now, this can create some friction, particularly if us as IT people are setting up iPads before we hand them to students. So we want all our apps to come down and everything before we hand them to the students. If we don't set a grace period on that passcode payload, it will apply immediately. So it will be asking you and prompting you to set a passcode on that iPad as soon as it gets through Setup Assistant and arrives at the home screen. So as soon as that configuration profile has been deployed down onto the device, you're going to get a passcode, please set a passcode prompt. You can consider using the grace period, or if it's a longer period of time that you want to allow without the passcode, perhaps while you're doing your IT work on the device, you can consider when you actually push that profile down. So you might consider that you push that profile down the day before school starts or something like that. Allows you to still do all your IT work without a passcode applied. And then when the student gets the device, they can set their own passcode that you haven't already set a passcode. The other one was web clips in shared iPad. Now, there is a web clips payload within a profile. Within our profiles. However, in shared iPad mode, we actually need to deliver that to the user level. Jamf School by default will deliver profiles to the device level. For web clips in shared iPad, we need to do it through the home screen layout when we're creating the shared iPad home screen layout, or they do work if you deploy them in guest mode. So if they're not using the user-based but are in guest mode, you can deploy a web clip through the normal profile method. The next thing I wanted to touch on is Apple is always innovating. Next month, we're eagerly awaiting for WWDC 25 and what Apple's going to bring to us. And with new operating systems, we get new keys that become available within our existing payloads. So our restrictions payload is probably the one that changes the most. And a good example of this is with our iOS 18 release, we got our Apple Intelligence settings. So you might need to, from time to time, come back into your restrictions payload and review what options have been added. And you can see there the operating system versions that they're supported on. So you can see that all these keys are supported from iOS 18 and above. In most cases, applying these settings to a device that is still on iOS 17 will not cause too many problems. In the macOS side of things, there can be payloads that can only be applied to a newer version. In those types of scenarios, we need to consider how we do our device scoping, and we might need to create a new version of our restrictions payload as an example, and only apply those new settings and scope it to devices that are on X operating system, so that it goes down as soon as that update's applied and it's available then. If you do send down a profile on an earlier version, particularly on the macOS side of things, the computer will accept it. But when it upgrades to the version that is supported, it won't actually read those settings. So you do need to apply them once it gets to that level. So that's just some considerations around new operating systems and when we get new keys available. Keeping an eye on the Jamf School release notes will help you keep on top of the new keys that are added. We will often mention what new keys we've added into any payloads, and you can come in and see how relevant they are to your environment. Time-based profiles. Now, if you've created a profile within Jamf School, you would see the option when you're creating the profile to tick on time-based. Now, time-based profiles sound like an awesome idea, and they do work in some scenarios. What a time-based profile means is that we can create a profile that only applies during specific hours. So, for example, we might want to have a profile that is an app, allow block list app profile. During school hours, we don't want to allow Facebook and Fortnite and Minecraft and other games or social media. But at home, we want to release those restrictions. And if the students have those apps installed on their device, we want to allow those apps to be available. So what we would do is we would set that we only want this app block list to apply during school hours. And we would set these are the allowed apps that we want to see during school hours. All other apps would be blocked during school hours. We would then set that profile to not exist on the device at the after school hours, and it would be removed from the device. Now, there are a few things to consider. Time-based profiles are still delivered via MDM. So we are still reliant on all of the requirements that are required for delivering a profile to a device. So when we send down a profile, it is delivered at the time that that we've set for it to be delivered. So, for example, we're creating an after hours or during school hours at 6 a.m. so that it's been applied by the time the kids get to school. We are allowing those, blocking those games. That is a new installation of a profile. So the way that works is that Jamf School knows or does a check for all time-based profiles across our entire fleet, or all of our tenants. It checks for those every 15 minutes. If it finds a profile, a time-based profile, it will then send, and it's the time for it to be applied, it will then send a refresh profiles list to all of the devices that are scoped to that profile. We then wait to receive that response back from the device, whether as to what profiles are installed, and if the time-based profile is due to be installed, it will be installed. Now, there are some considerations around what happens with MDM and how the state of the device that we need to consider. So if a device is locked with a passcode, it may not receive the MDM command. If the device is off, it will not receive the MDM command. If the device is in low power mode, it will not receive, or it will receive the command, but it won't prioritize them. So there are some considerations that you need to think about to ensure that you're getting a good end user experience, and also not impacting when they come back to school that they aren't able to access the apps, or they've still got access to the apps that we don't want them to have access to. Until we're able to deliver a time-based profile via declarative device management, which will give us a more accurate side of things, time-based profiles should be used in a very considered way. When the profile is removed from the device, it actually happens on the device. So that will always happen immediately. So the device will disable the profile directly on the device. Unfortunately, we still have to send down the new profile when it's been disabled. So we still need to consider network and all of those things that I just touched on. We can configure our time-based profiles using our holidays that are set in Jamf School that Tom has set for you at the top level. And we can say, don't apply these profiles during the holidays. So perhaps we have some restrictions, or once again, our app block list. That's a really good example of how time-based profiles are used in a lot of schools, is to, we can have different apps available during the school holidays and give the kids a little bit more freedom with their devices. The biggest consideration I would say is where we see problems with time-based profiles is when they're used around trying to allow or disallow functionality that is provided by Apple. So, for example, turning on or off the Apple ID to allow a student during the holidays, for example, to log in with their personal Apple ID instead of being logged in with their managed Apple ID. We see, if you think about the way that Apple has designed Apple IDs and iCloud, it's not designed to be switched in and out all the time. It's designed to be on a managed Apple ID and stay on a managed Apple ID, or on a personal Apple ID and stay on a personal Apple ID. So we have seen some schools that have tried to have controls around functionality like that have a lot of friction between iCloud and what is happening on the device. So just something to consider if you are looking at using time-based profiles. You also need to consider that it is an MDM queue. And if you have a large number of devices, for example, if Tom was to say, let's apply one at the top level, 35,000 devices all checking in and applying a time-based profile all at the same time at 6 a.m. every morning, you will see delays. You won't see them happen immediately at the time that you're looking to have that applied, just on sheer number of devices and the MDMQ having to get through. So a couple of considerations. Don't say don't use them, but use them with consideration and wisely. And happy for you to reach out to us for advice if you are wanting to implement something that with time-based profiles in your schools. So finally, I wanted to jump over to a Jamf school instance, and we'll just have a look at some of the areas that we can see where profiles are installed. So we've kind of touched on profile conflicts already. The activity log and how we can see when a profile has been installed and uninstalled, and what we can see on the device details to see what profiles have been installed on a device. So this is my test Jamf school instance. And if we go to profiles and overview, this is where we will see a list of our profiles. We can see, this is where Tom was talking about, we can see the hardware that they're for, how many devices they're scoped to, and this gives us a status of how many have successfully deployed or installed the profile. We can also see the last updated, and we can do our editing and cloning and all of our options and deleting from these icons over here. So let's just take a look at a profile down here. This is Jamf Trust profile. So this is configuring the Jamf Safe Internet settings. Now this is an imported profile. So this is an example of what is called a custom profile would look like, and we can't actually edit any of these settings. Here is where we could turn on our time filter. One recommendation I would say with time filters that I forgot to say is when you're creating a time-based profile, you can turn on this use time filter tick box when you're creating it. I don't necessarily recommend that. I recommend create it first and then turn this time filtering on, because we have seen some issues where that first tick box doesn't apply for the first time that it meets the criteria for installing the time-based. So here we can see the scope of this profile. And in this settings button, much like we talked about with our apps, we can actually still change a profile to be on-demand installation, which would mean it would become available in Jamf Student for a student to install, or Jamf Teacher, for a student or teacher to install on their own, instead of us forcing it to go down. Here we can see the devices that are in scope and whether they've received it and whether it's installed on there. We can also see the version that is installed on the device here. If we click on a device level, we get our activity log, which this device hasn't done anything for a while. I probably should have looked at that. So here we can see our refresh profiles list. That's not a profile. So which did I pick? If the profile was to install, I don't have an example, sorry. If the profile was to be installed, we would see an install profile and the profile name that was being installed. These columns here indicate when the command was created and when it was actually actioned onto the device, or when the device responded. So when we send a command to a device, we're sending it out via APNS through Apple. Apple will deliver it to the device, and then we wait for that response to come back to Jamf School. You might sometimes see that the device didn't apply, particularly if it was locked or turned off, that it received the command was sent at 4:15, but the device was off all night, and then the completed won't be till the next day. So we'll also see that with our profiles. If we want to have a look to see what profiles have been installed on a device, we can pop over to Managed Profiles. And here we have some options that help us when we're troubleshooting. So here is a Safe List app that is currently disabled on this device, and I've come in here and clicked the Disable button. So this is useful if you're doing some testing and you want to remove a profile to see if that profile is having an impact on one individual device. You can actually disable it on that device, see if that fixes your problem, and then you can click re-enable and it will re-enable immediately on that device. You can also reinstall a profile from here, and that basically push down the profile again. That's probably it. We can also see if there's been any other profiles applied. So like from the student app, for example, or user installed profiles. So we can see all the profiles that exist on the device. So we already touched on profile conflicts. So I think that's all I have for you.